So thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to come here this morning, or as we're getting close to noon. I know I'm the last thing between us and lunch, so I will do what I can to move on. A couple things, I guess, before we start. Again, part of MSAC, the Missouri Sedimentation Action Coalition, we deal with the upper Missouri River, which is essentially from Sioux City up. That's the area that we look at for the sedimentation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so our purpose and our intent and our goals are for education and to help bring together different aspects of the sediment problem. Currently, at least for the last several years, we've been working with the Corps of Engineers, focusing mostly on Lewis and Clark Lake and working towards a sediment management plan, which is perhaps one of the most, if not the most complex sediment area that we have, certainly in the United States, given all of the different factors that go into that particular stretch of river. Again, as he said, I grew up on it. I live about 6-7 blocks away now in Springfield. I have a nice boat. It's been on the water once just because of other events. And I tell you that the downfall of that is right now we're in a low water year, and so both the fisheries in South Dakota and Nebraska have said about how good the walleye fishing is in low water years, and according to Facebook, it's doing pretty good, and I'm not a part of it at this point in time. That being said, as I kind of go through these couple examples, not having the boat on the water very often is also kind of a detriment, because you got to know what you're doing out there anymore because of the sediment. So I'm very impressed by the folks that do get out there and do it. So hopefully I'll have a little more time this year. As far as averages and numbers we talk about, I'd kind of like to throw this out to you now, and we'll come back to it at the end. A lot of times we talk about average years or an average year of runoff and sedimentation, these kinds of things. So, if we take the numbers 4 and 6, that averages out to 5. 1 and 9 also averages out to 5. On the upper Missouri River this year, it's probably trending closer to a 1. There was low snowpack, 60-70% of normal. Not a whole lot of moisture this year. I mowed my lawn 3 times this entire year when I should have probably been mowing it 3 times in June. So you can see that kind of input makes changes on an annual basis on how you can look and address some of these things. So kind of think about that as we go through, and I know being at this point, this is the bad part about going at this point in time, because there's been so much that went out this morning, so I'll probably trample over myself here a little bit with some things and some great things that were said this morning. So we'll give it a go. So first off, Missouri River particularly, but I think this is true throughout the nation, these dams are really a system of systems. They were developed through legislation back in 1944. There's a lot of history that gets said, particularly about Gavin's Point Dam and locations, and it should have been in this place and not that place. Of course, we're in 2026. It exists where it is. It's not moving, so we deal with it now. But you think back to 1944, and there's a lot of the things that were said this morning on dams that have been built in the United States, what was going on in the country at the time. Grand ideas coming out of World War II or during World War II. Went from production of aircraft that was almost nothing to thousands of years. So big ideas, big plans that could be put into place very quickly. There was a lot of math, a lot of engineering going on a lot of these, but also not necessarily a whole lot of look ahead into the future, or at least understanding of some of the things. Of particular, you'll see this picture on the lower right-hand side is Gavin's Point Dam. This was taken from an aircraft in 2021. The reservoir at that point in time is frozen over, so it helps to give a little bit of an idea of where things are at. As you stretch up about underneath where it says dynamic systems is the front leading delta, downstream delta of the Missouri River now. Springfield, where I'm from, is just slightly upstream from that. My hometown in 1957, when this dam was completed and started operation, was the very top end of Lewis and Clark Lake. So we had the very last access to it as a lake or reservoir. You go a little bit further up on what would be the left-hand side there, you'll hit the Niobrara River, and then you take about another 30 miles up the Niobrara River and you would get to the Spencer, Nebraska Dam. That was built in 1927, so leading ahead of that a little bit, but then reconstructed in 1940. By 1950, that one had a sedimentation problem that had been identified, so the problem was there, and the solution at that time was to start sluicing ultimately twice a year. So this was already identified as to one of the leading factors coming into this. Again, back to the system of systems. Gavins Point and Fort Randall, they work in tandem. Gavins Point, of course, regulates going downstream and supporting the shipping. So if one thing affects one, ultimately it's going to affect the other, if not the much larger system. So when we start looking at the past on that, things were pretty stable until probably the mid-1980s. So I really started getting onto the river about 1992, 93. But things were pretty stable coming out of the Niobrara River. There was definitely some sedimentation, some things going on. You're losing a little bit every year. The river changes almost every year, somewhat in the spring. But after 85, 86, we started to have larger events, and there are two very significant ones that have changed, we believe really have changed the history and where we're going with this particular area, and something maybe to look at a number of other ones. So this stretch of the river supports a number of things, obviously, like any portion does. Irrigation, of course the power generation, all those areas, as well as drinking water. So one of the things that comes up is, what's the impact on these if something happens? As a mayor of a small town, we are just, and I knock on wood, because in April we took substantial completion of a new water plant that included 2 new surface water intakes into the Missouri River. So that pump house replaced one that was flooded during the Spencer dam event that I'm going to touch on, and the 2 new water intakes are not about from me to the wall. I'd like to last 60 or 70 years and have some future mayor have to deal with it. I'm afraid that if not me, probably a successor here down the road is going to have to deal with the water intakes and getting water into the community because of sedimentation on the river that it's making its way down. That's about $1.1 million that it cost last year to put that in. So that's probably the first real economic piece that I had a little bit of an eye opener on. But again, these systems, they are dynamic, as you all know. Things change, and things can change very rapidly. And with all of the various systems and items that are going in, now on top of that, of course, we have the aquatic invasive species in this area, particularly the Phragmites, and as we're finding, zebra mussels. And when you start having zebra mussels, interestingly enough, even in something as large as the Missouri River, it has an effect. Depending upon your perspective, it's positive or negative. For some, we're starting to see that there's some negative effect, obviously, because they're invasive and they're coming in. Unfortunately, and being a fisherman, they're starting to clean up some water, which is also helping the fisheries. So it's probably crossing itself out. And when you have good fisheries, economics help out, and you got folks coming into town, tourism. It becomes a little tougher to educate on the importance of dealing with these things. So where I'm really going to focus on here is the confluence. The confluence is defined as the joining of 2 flowing bodies of water. So what you see on the screen, the 2 pictures, is where the Missouri River and the Niobrara River meet. The top left picture from April of 1999 shows clearly some sediment coming in, but it's a very passable Missouri River area. Just where it has Niobrara River, there's a train bridge there. Growing up, we used to take the boat up to there. We could walk in Niobrara, get ice cream. Worked out pretty cool because there was no bridge. So for me to get to Niobrara, which today is 13 miles, was about a 70-mile drive. The Chief Standing Bear Bridge opened in 1998, which is just off of that, off of those pictures, just downstream. What you see on the other picture is March 2025, a significantly different confluence area. What happened between the two? We had the floods of 2011, and then we had the Spencer Dam failure in 2019. Until then, the April 99 picture was generally about what it looked like, probably at least back into the 80s or 70s. It was relatively, static is not the right word, but it was a relatively consistent system. Once that changed with these two events, then you see where the changes are there in the confluence. Now, instead of having one leading delta 15 miles downstream, there are now 3 deltas that are causing problems downstream, upstream, as well as up the Niobrara River. So this graphic is from an update from the South Dakota Geological Survey in 2023, just to identify where does the sediment coming from that's going into Lewis and Clark Lake. Previous to this, there's a lot coming out of the tributaries. It wasn't measured all that well, or it had been quite some time since they'd done it. You can see in the red were estimates from 2012. When they revised this in 2023, they revised it up. So now Niobrara River is about 50 to 55%, probably trends a little bit higher than that for the sediment coming into Lewis and Clark Lake. That is nearly 100% pure, almost usable sand, of course, coming out of the sand hills. The Niobrara River is a aquifer-fed river, so it is always flowing. It doesn't really have a stop to it. So even in the winter, it's bringing that in to some extent. And then the other 20 or 25% is actually coming down from upstream, either passing through Fort Randall or getting picked up on the way down. What that does now is that puts that bullseye on that confluence area. That's about 80 to 85% of all the sediment, all the particulate is now meeting in that area. So as it's getting plugged, it's dropping off there and changing the dynamic on how this goes. That also includes changing the dynamics then of other tributaries that feed in. The Ponca River is just above this, or Ponca Creek. Bazille Creek on the Niobrara side is just below us, as well as Emmanuel Creek on the South Dakota side. But as it's been pointed out a number of times here, last couple of days, knowing where that sediment comes from and what it is an important part of addressing it and learning what you can do with it. So, event number 1, the flood, spring of 2011, record snowpacks feeding the Missouri River all the way up the system, up into Montana. You throw rainfall on top of it at record levels, which not only adds to the watershed, but of course melts the snow in a little bit quicker period. And by the time we get to Memorial Day, there's just a whole bunch of water coming into the system. Gavin's Point Dam ramps up to flow through of 160,000 gallons per feet per second, the most it's ever had, and could probably handle, and you can see that in the right picture there. Water levels that are multiple feet above anything that's been done before. In the pictures there, the one on the left, that's Dakota Dunes itself, and then the one in the middle, I took from the overlook at the Chief Standing Bear Bridge, looking at the confluence after things went down as we got into the fall, and you can see all the bare sand that's out. That was all deposited during that period of time. What other things happen during massive floods or massive events like that, particularly on a large body of water like this? Okay, that was before Phragmites, so there were still cattails, cattail reeds. Cattail reeds float. When water comes up, they all floated to the shore. They plugged up bays and rivers and caused a whole nother set of dynamics to happen. As you have that water, of course, flowing over existing sandbars and existing areas on the river, and there still were a lot of islands that went back to the original pre-dam days. As the water went over it, it was dropping off that sediment load into the slack water, so raising those up. Could very easily go out afterwards and find sandbars that are now 3 and 4 and 5 foot above what the normal water line had been. And then the areas within the river itself where it meanders had changed and had started to take on new areas that, because of the amount of sand and the way it's packed in, will no longer erode and change over winter. So they're becoming very static there. Normally the downstream delta, which is in the previous picture you could see there, adds about 400 feet a year. Now right now that downstream has reached to the widest point in the Missouri River at that area. So it's about 2 miles wide. Of course, when we go up to where the bridge is between Springfield and Niobrara, that's one of the narrower areas. So once you hit that 2 mile wide, when you're talking about 400 feet a year, that's a pretty significant amount, obviously, that's being dropped off. Single event, the flood, 2011, it was estimated that about 4,000 feet was added to that delta. So multiple years, along with all the other changes that happened, that took out a significant part of the delta in the reservoir. The next catastrophic failure, as I call it, as we look at it, happened on March 14, 2019. That's the Spencer, Nebraska dam that finally failed completely and released the water and the sediment there. It was estimated about 11-foot wall of water went down the Niobrara River, which had about a 25 to 30 mile reach to get to the Missouri River. That in turn kept a good chunk of that wall, a water wall, for about another 20 to 30 miles. That's where it finally made it to Springfield, which is another 10 miles downstream from that confluence. Very, very cold winter, very, very thick ice. I'll show you a picture of that, which just adds to the destruction. Catastrophic failure in the event that this was both a natural as well as a man-made event. The moisture that caused the breach and the failure of the dam happened hundreds of miles away from where the actual destruction was, because that was much further upstream in the Niobrara River Valley. But the dam was, of course, man-made. It had known to have issues. In fact, by the time that the flood or the dam failure happened, Nebraska had already decided to close down the dam and to decommission it. They just hadn't got to that point yet. The sluicing was identified as a source of trying to maintain the dam and some power generation, which is good. The problem is it probably went on for decades without really relooking at and coming back and see, is this working and where are we going with this? When you add in the cold weather and the thick ice, then you add to the catastrophic portion of the destruction. So ultimately, when it failed, you can see damage was well downstream, and economically you can measure certain things at the moment. I know how much a set of water intakes now cost for a small town to put in the Missouri River. However, the economic impact for that, of course, is all the water that we produce for the citizens, that we resale value, all those kinds of things that go into it. So the two pictures that you see there, the one on the left, that's going into the Springfield Marina. You can see where the sign was bent over. There's a fairly large chunk of ice there. The one on the right, I happen to be in, I was in Europe at the time, but I happened to be back in the States at the end of March, so I was able to come up, take a look at it. That's my size 11.5 foot there on that chunk of ice that was there, and that was throughout the river valley. So you take water, frozen water, you just add that much more destructive power to something like that, and you have a massive, massive issue. So what happens when all of this gets said and done? You go back to the confluence. That picture I took this past Sunday, you can see where that sandbar that was there back in 2011 now, of course, is greened over. Those are phragmites. They're not nice reeds and all that kind of stuff, so you have invasive species growing on it. That is very, very skinny water. So I'm to the point where it's very tough to transit that. And this is a challenge when I look back to my youth. 1984 was the last year of the running water to Niobrara ferry boat. It went right through there. So that was where one of the last ferry boats on the Missouri River went. It was nice, it was deep enough to run it, but as it was getting silted in, it had to end. There's obviously no possible way you could do that anymore. So that's 25 years, 25, 30 years of change. Really two massive events. If you look at this though, it's really the same basic problem. We do our man-made structures, which change the flow of the river and change how the sediment moves through it. Okay, these are very well understood, and we know that portion of it. This particular area, Lewis and Clark Lake in the upper reaches, very flat area on the Missouri River, and then on top of that it widens out, so you have all of these other compounding issues. Trying to deal with it, and you call it a problem or an issue, however we want to address it, has so many more different aspects that come into it. So now, working with this, we've accelerated to the point where Gavin's Point Dam, we're starting to look at significant loss of power generation and use by the mid-2070s. So 100 years from when I was born, and my father was around when the dam closed. So within about 2 generations, we're going to lose a significant part of what was a fairly large reservoir if nothing changes. The Corps of Engineers normally works on a 50-year planning horizon, so now we're getting to that 50 years, really start pushing. What are you going to do? Are you going to leave the dam? Are you going to close it? We're going to try to continue to keep it. We certainly would like to keep the water, keep some of it, recognizing that we're not going to go to zero sediment. I mean, that's not going to happen. There's no single way of addressing this either. It's going to take multiple approaches, and it's going to continue on. The day will come, as he said, reservoirs have a lifespan. You look at all the different variables, and the variables have changed in the last 20 years and will continue to change. The environmental variables that are out there, not the least of which is this is a very complex area. When it comes to federal and state agencies. You've got the Corps of Engineers, you've got the National Park Service in here as part of the Missouri National Recreation River, you have 2 states and their agencies. Makes for a very interesting group of folks to try to get synced up to do something. Not that everybody doesn't recognize it, it's just a tough group to work with. You have the economic problems with it. As we're becoming a little bit more of a recreational culture, we're starting to see a lot more recreation tourism coming in. The state of Nebraska is putting in about $40 million right now on a new marina in Wygon, Nebraska, which is across from Yankton. It's going to be 400 slips. That's a significant economic investment to put in to a lake that you're only going to get maybe a good 30 or 40 years out of, and we're talking larger boats too. So as the water gets skinnier, you can't do those. Why would you invest that kind of money and then just step back and say, okay, we'll just let it go? Because that also is driving private investment along the Nebraska stretch of Lewis and Clark Lake as well to do that. You have the available resources, and what can you use for that? And those things change from year to year. And then, of course, ultimately you have both the individual, the local, and the political will of being able to look at and say, okay, this is an issue or this is something that we need to address, but can we get over that? Can we get over that piece? So when we go into the 3 deltas, of course, are backing up. It's going to continue to move down and continue to cause issues. So a few years ago, MSAC joined with the U.S. Corps of Engineers to do a Section 22 study, with the end result being a sediment management plan for the Lewis and Clark Reservoir and the reaches. Things went splendidly, even during the COVID periods. The phase 2 portion of that, which was completed about 2 years ago, was the research-heavy piece. Some of you may have been involved or seen some of the results. Came up with 4 options, and as it's been discussed here. So you have dredging, which would be expensive, dumb, but where do you do it, and how do you be effective at it, because you can't do the whole thing. Sluicing, essentially nature is doing that for us. So we'd prefer to keep what we have, and sluicing probably is not a very good option given the terrain of where we're at and how it would work here. Watershed management, always a very loaded, very tough conversation to have, particularly when you're talking with farmers and ranchers. We're trying to maximize the value of their land to get in where obviously some of the sediment is coming from those. Short-term game versus the long-term goal of maintaining the reservoir. But there are other pieces in watershed management as well, to include things like the invasive species that are coming in and how are those affecting it. And then Niobrara River sediment collection. So here's a very bright spot. Even though this plan isn't approved, 2 years ago the Corps actually fully funded for some pocket change, but brought in a bedload collector system, which is a very dumb piece of equipment that goes in the water, and it collects the sand, and you can pull some sand out to do it. It works splendidly well on the Niobrara River that is so full of sand, and it has relatively clean water and relatively clean sand. So it's a demo. It's not gonna take out everything that's coming down, but as you start to see this, and we can start getting that out to some of the farmers and ranchers and businesses there that say you can do this pretty cheaply and get this out. It's essentially a fancy version of an irrigation pump if you have one of those where you could just add it on and maybe have a little pocket business on the side. We're not looking at big numbers, but if you start getting a small percentage out, you start to potentially make a dent in supporting it. So that worked it worked so well that within about 48 hours the collector was plugged because it worked so well pulling the sediment out to do that. And then in addition to that, the Guardian of the Reservoir competition that was done at University of Colorado came up with a couple of autonomous dredge systems, which MSAC kind of took a look at and is really interested in the desediment, their autonomous one. Although this Nessie is kind of interesting concept as well for a different area, but to potentially get it in. Of course, what do you do with all the stuff? Therein lies the entire problem. You can do everything you want, but there's so much physical matter in there that you can pump it on shore, and we can have Mount Everest in Nebraska if we wanted to. So you got to start looking at things to do. And so that's really where the focus has started to change now, is to find those beneficial uses. They exist on the coasts and some of these other areas, but what can you do with the stuff that's there that we would need to move out? So one of the potentials there is to do some types of a Guardians event and get something for beneficial use for this particular area to come out. Continuing on, without the sediment management plan, of course, it's fairly simple to throw something at it or try to get a little funding and get told no, or to get a little research. The really goal is to get the sediment management plan on paper, get it signed. It can be very, very broad, very somewhat generic because it's a living, breathing document. But once it's in, then you're able to move forward at least with some degree of coherence. And that's something that can and we believe would help all of the other reservoirs up and down the area and throughout the nation. So going into the final piece before questions, this is a huge environment to navigate. Environmental, social, political, economic, fiscal. Those are probably the real challenge at working at some of these items, because it's just so many different entities, so many different stakeholders, so many different folks to deal with. Coming down here to Tuttle Creek last year, hugely impressed with the group, because of all those stakeholders, a good portion of them are involved in the project. And so when you have that, you can move forward and you can get some things done. When you're dealing with multiple federal agencies, multiple states, multiple civilian agencies, landowners, all kinds of folks, tribal entities, because this particular area has two tribes, one with a reservation, and then the Ponca, which doesn't have a reservation, but it's the native homeland, so they have a serious stake in the area and the geography and the history. So makes it quite challenging. Makes for a very interesting group of folks that I get to meet and visit with from time to time. So with that, that concludes mine. I'm about ready. You guys are ready for lunch, so if anybody has any questions, or I will be around by all means. Again, I thoroughly thank everybody for their patience and for the presentations this morning. I go quick. Yes, sir. Sure. The bed load collector is essentially an airplane wing. It's a very dumb system. It has an airplane wing shape. It has grates across the top, and then it has a pump system that goes on shore. As you set it into the flow of the water, as the water comes over, it creates that eddy on top, and the sandy water drops in. It pulls some of that sand out, or the sediment. In the Niobrara case, it's all sand. And then that's just pumped on shore through dewatering stations, and the end result is just the sediment. And in their case, that was two different very pure sands. One is they call it the sugar sand. It actually went through some of the geotubes they had. It was that fine, and then just a regular normal sand. That over the course of about 3 or 4 days had a dump truck load just that quick. So it's very dumb. It's very simple. It just takes a little electricity, but then of course some maintenance on the backside. So, and they make them anywhere from a 4-foot to about a 40-foot wide collector to get placed in to do that. So very cheap to do that. But anyway, sorry. One of the challenges that we had, we were looking for folks to take that sand out of that first one and what we could do with it. Because of the invasive species, you get stuck, right? Because of the zebra mussels, Norfolk, Nebraska was working on a project to do a nice little beachfront and some downtown revitalization area. The problem is the watershed, the stream they wanted to do that on, so far is clean from zebra mussels. So the only way to get that sand down there, if they wanted to use it, was you're either going to accept it and you're probably going to contaminate that area, or if it sits over the winter, it goes through a number of freeze-thaw cycles in the air and dries out, then it would be okay to put down. So even here, we almost kind of find an area to help somebody out, and then you can't do it because of another issue. So, sir. So I'll catch the first one. I'll ask you for a second one. From the Niobrara River confluence to the dam is about 30 miles on the river, 25 to 30 miles. And I'm sorry, I catch the other question. The Niobrara. That's sure. Then that's been looked at as one of the ways. Can you get it by there? And there are a couple of papers that have been put out to pump it, essentially dredge it out, or somehow get it into a pipeline, get it around Gavin's Point Dam, and then re-enter the system below the dam. Very expensive. Terrain is very limited to try to get pipelines through there. Just not feasible at this point to try to move it from there. As it changes, as the delta keeps pushing forward, more folks keep going back to it and say, well, as the delta keeps moving, we've shortened our pipeline, but it still is a very expensive, very tough endeavor. So, okay, thank you again, and. Again, sediment management plans are crucial tools for mitigating, and so hopefully take that away. And again, thank you for your time, and thank you for sticking with me.